Across decades, filmmakers mixed aliens, strange experiments, futuristic societies, adult themes, and deliberately provocative imagery, until censors sometimes struggled to classify the results. Not every film here carried the same official X rating in every country, but all pushed beyond normal mainstream limits. And by the time we reach number 1, science fiction will barely look like science fiction anymore. Before we enter this forbidden side of the genre, like the video, share it with another cult movie fan, and subscribe to the channel. Number 19. Barbarella, 1968. Long before modern science fiction became dark, serious, and obsessed with realistic technology, this movie imagined the future as a colorful pop art dream. Jane Fonda plays Barbarella, an astronaut from a peaceful Earth who is sent across the galaxy to find scientist Durand Durand. He has disappeared with a dangerous weapon, and Earth fears that the invention could bring violence back to a civilization that claims to have moved beyond war. That setup sounds almost respectable, but the journey becomes increasingly strange. Barbarella crash lands, meets bizarre children, crosses dangerous landscapes, encounters underground rebels, and eventually teams up with Pygar, a blind angel who can literally fly. Every new location looks less like a scientific prediction and more like a psychedelic comic book brought to life. The opening sequence immediately tells audiences what kind of movie they are watching. Barbarella floats in zero gravity while removing her space gear, as the credits drift around her. For a studio-backed science fiction movie in 1968, the scene was unusually provocative. Number 18. Zeta 1, 1969. Imagine a British spy movie colliding with a psychedelic science fiction comic, and you begin to understand the wonderfully confused world of Zeta 1. The story follows a secret agent who becomes involved with the Angvians, a hidden civilization of powerful women led by the mysterious Zeta. Their society exists somewhere between fantasy science fiction and the colorful espionage films that dominated the late 1960s. Nothing about the movie seems interested in realism. Characters walk through brightly colored sets, futuristic costumes appear, without much explanation, and secret organizations treat the discovery of an unknown civilization as though it were simply another inconvenient assignment. The plot involves disappearances, surveillance, secret missions, and a plan connected to recruiting women into the Angvian world. The most memorable scenes arrive when the film reveals more of that hidden society. Costumes, lighting, and production design make the place look like pages torn from an underground comic. Unlike many films that are casually labeled X-rated years later, Zeta 1 really did receive an X certificate in Britain. That matters because it shows how the boundary between science fiction and adults-only exploitation was already becoming blurred at the end of the 1960s. It wants to take spies, secret civilizations, futuristic technology, and provocative comedy, throw them into the same room, and see what survives. If you're enjoying these forgotten oddities, subscribe to the channel because the countdown gets much stranger from here. And share this video with someone who thinks controversial science fiction only started in modern cinema. Number 17. Flash Gordon, 1974. Sometimes a title tells you exactly how seriously a movie expects to be taken. Flash Gordon transforms the heroic structure of the old Flash Gordon serials into one of the most outrageous science fiction parodies of the 1970s. The plot sends hero Flesh Dale Ardor and scientist Flexi Jerkoff across space after Earth comes under the influence of the ridiculous Emperor Wang. From there, the movie becomes a non-stop collection of bizarre kingdoms, miniature spacecraft monsters, villains, and jokes that would never have appeared in the family-friendly serials being parodied. The filmmakers did not merely place actors in front of cardboard walls and hope the title would sell tickets. There are elaborate miniature ships, stop-motion creature sets, and fantasy environments created with real craftsmanship. One of the most memorable moments involves a large stop-motion creature confronting the heroes. Then another ridiculous joke immediately reminds everyone what kind of production this really is. The censorship history became part of the legend. The original American release received an X rating before later edits produced an R-rated version. That made the controversy official rather than something invented by later marketing. What keeps Flash Gordon interesting is its strange commitment. The filmmakers clearly loved the old space serials enough to recreate their style, but they also wanted to break every rule those serials followed. The result is not sophisticated science fiction, yet it remains a perfect example of exploitation filmmakers borrowing a beloved genre and seeing how far they could push it before the entire rocket came apart. Number 16. Liquid Sky, 1982. Some science fiction movies build alien worlds with huge sets and expensive visual effects. Liquid Sky simply looks at early 1980s Manhattan and somehow makes Earth feel more alien than another planet. Tiny extraterrestrial visitors arrive above New York, searching for chemicals connected to intense human sensation. Their small craft settles near the apartment of Margaret, a fashion model immersed in the city's underground art and nightclub scene. Margaret moves through a world filled with experimental fashion, electronic music, neon makeup, and people behaving as though conventional society exists somewhere very far away. As unusual events begin occurring around Margaret, she slowly realizes the invisible visitors may be collecting something from the people surrounding her. The movie's most famous images come from its fashion shows and club sequences. Faces are painted with aggressive geometric patterns. Clothing looks futuristic without resembling traditional spacesuits. The electronic soundtrack creates an atmosphere that feels cold, artificial, and deliberately disconnected from normal life. It makes the human characters look almost more extraterrestrial than the aliens themselves. The provocative material drew attention, but Liquid Sky works because it refuses to settle into one genre. It can feel like science fiction, dark comedy, experimental art, fashion satire, and underground drama within the same 10 minutes. They arrive in a corner of humanity already behaving like an unknown species. New York is not presented as the normal world being interrupted by outsiders. It is presented as the strange planet, and the visitors may simply be the observers trying to understand it. Number 15. Forbidden World, 1982. After Alien became a phenomenon, low-budget producers everywhere discovered that audiences loved watching people become trapped inside futuristic facilities with creatures nobody could control. Forbidden World takes that formula and removes almost every trace of restraint. Space troubleshooter Mike Colby is sent to an isolated research station where scientists have created an experimental biological organism. The creature was supposed to help solve a serious problem, but like so many laboratory creations in science fiction, it develops abilities its makers never anticipated. Soon the organism begins changing its structure and absorbing organic material. Researchers who thought they understood their creation suddenly have no idea what it might become next. One of the film's strongest recurring ideas involves scientists continuing to analyze the creature even after the situation is obviously catastrophic. Somebody always seems to want another sample, another test, or another explanation, while everyone else would prefer to survive. The practical creature effects provide much of the entertainment. Because the organism mutates, the filmmakers can make each appearance different and more unpredictable. The movie also includes much more adult material than the prestigious science fiction films it imitates. Yet that excess is precisely why Forbidden World survived while many similar films disappeared. It knows it cannot compete with Alien in money, star power, or technical polish, so it competes with speed, weirdness, and sheer nerve. Every corridor promises another problem, every scientist makes questionable decisions, and every attempt to control the creature only proves that the experiment should probably never have been started. Number 14. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth often becomes disturbing, precisely because it moves quietly. David Bowie plays Thomas Jerome Newton, an extraterrestrial who arrives on Earth from a planet suffering from catastrophic drought. Newton is not here to conquer anyone. He wants to use Earth's resources and his advanced knowledge to build a spacecraft that can return home with water for his family. Using technology far beyond human understanding, he develops valuable inventions, forms a corporation, and becomes extraordinarily wealthy. Then Earth begins changing him. Newton develops a relationship with Mary Lou, becomes distracted by human habits, and gradually falls into addiction. Government agencies and business interests also grow suspicious of the mysterious millionaire whose inventions seem decades ahead of anything other companies possess. One of the film's most famous scenes comes when Newton reveals his real appearance. He simply removes the human disguise, and the quietness makes the scene even more unsettling. Mary Lou suddenly realizes that the person in front of her has never been human. The movie also contains unusually frank adult material for a prestigious science fiction production of its era, and different release versions were shortened in some markets. Newton arrives believing intelligence and technology will allow him to control everything. Instead, wealth addiction, surveillance, and emotional attachment trap him on the planet he only intended to visit. By the end, the alien who came to save his family can barely save himself, making the film far sadder than its controversial reputation suggests. Number 13. Spermula, 1976. Alien invasions usually begin with enormous spacecraft appearing over cities and terrified governments preparing for war. This French oddity imagines an invasion that works very differently. A mysterious group of extraterrestrial women arrives on Earth believing that certain human impulses are responsible for aggression, competition, and conflict. Instead of attacking civilization with futuristic weapons, they decide humanity needs to be changed from within. Their plan takes them into wealthy social circles where they observe human behavior and begin carrying out a bizarre form of social engineering. The movie therefore spends more time in luxurious interiors and elegant gatherings than military bases or laboratories. The most memorable scenes involve the visitors calmly discussing their philosophy, while the people around them slowly realize that these outsiders are not simply eccentric strangers. The aliens sincerely believe they are offering humanity an improvement. If an advanced species decided that one particular human instinct caused most violence and conflict, would removing it create a better civilization? Or would something essential disappear along with the danger? Still, the central idea is darker than the surface suggests. These aliens do not think of themselves as conquerors. They think of themselves as reformers. Their goal is not to destroy humanity, but redesign it according to their definition of perfection. Science fiction repeatedly warns about people who want to build perfect societies by changing human nature. Spermula simply packages that old nightmare inside one of the most provocative alien stories of the 1970s. Number 12. Spaced Out, 1979. 3 extraterrestrial women arriving on Earth sounds like the beginning of a serious first-contact drama. Within minutes, Spaced Out makes it clear that seriousness has been left somewhere on another planet. Also known as Outer Touch, this British comedy follows alien visitors whose spacecraft becomes involved with several ordinary humans. Once the Earth people end up aboard the vessel, nearly every cultural misunderstanding becomes an excuse for another outrageous joke. The aliens are not terrifying invaders. In many ways, they are just as confused by humans as the humans are by them. Traditional first contact stories treat an alien encounter as the greatest event in human history. Here, meeting extraterrestrials feels more like arriving at an extremely strange party where nobody understands the rules. The spacecraft scenes provide most of the memorable imagery. Futuristic costumes, brightly lit corridors, and wonderfully cheap control panels create the unmistakable appearance of late 1970s British low-budget science fiction. None of it looks technically convincing, but the homemade atmosphere gives the movie personality. As the characters explore the vessel, both species repeatedly misunderstand each other's behavior. Adult humor gradually becomes more important than the actual mystery of where the visitors came from. Writers have always used aliens to examine human customs from an outsider's perspective. Familiar behavior can suddenly look absurd when another species observes it without understanding the social rules. Spaced Out takes that concept and pushes it into deliberately tasteless territory. Nobody involved seems to think they are making 2001, A Space Odyssey, which is probably one reason the film remains such an entertaining cult curiosity. Number 11. Sex Mission, 1984. Behind one of the most provocative titles on this countdown is a clever Polish satire about propaganda authority and the way governments can rewrite reality. 2 ordinary men volunteer for an experimental hibernation program. Their plan is simple: sleep for a few years, wake up, and prove that long-term suspended animation can work. When the men finally awaken, decades have passed. They are told that civilization suffered a catastrophe and that men disappeared entirely. The remaining population now lives underground in a society composed only of women. Officials explain the new social order and teach them the approved version of history. Everything about the old world is described as primitive, dangerous, and better forgotten. One of the funniest and most important sequences involves their education about the past. Language has changed, inconvenient facts are missing, and official explanations replace anything that might challenge the system. The 2 men gradually realize they are not simply trapped in a future dominated by another gender. They are trapped inside a tightly managed political structure where information itself is controlled. As they search for a way out, the supposedly perfect underground civilization begins revealing contradictions and secrets. The film uses an exaggerated future to joke about censorship, propaganda, manufactured history, and societies where people accept official statements because alternatives no longer exist. Underneath the humor is a frightening idea. If those in power can control education and memory, they may not need to control every citizen physically. Eventually, people can be trained to police reality for themselves. Number 10. The adult version of Jekyll and Hyde, 1972. Robert Louis Stevenson's famous scientist had already transformed on screen countless times, so this unusual adaptation needed a different reason to exist. Its solution was to take the familiar Jekyll and Hyde idea and push it directly into adults-only exploitation. Dr. Jekyll creates a formula designed to separate hidden parts of human personality. He believes science can isolate the impulses respectable society forces people to suppress. Once he experiments on himself, another personality emerges, and the controlled scientist begins losing authority over the very thing he created. The chemical formula becomes permission for increasingly provocative situations, turning the transformation into a symbol of what happens when social restraint disappears. The transformation scenes remain the main attraction. Instead of relying only on dramatic lighting or facial prosthetics, the movie emphasizes the growing difference between Jekyll's public identity and the impulses released by his experiment. Every change makes it harder for him to return to the calm scientist seen at the beginning. Underneath all the sensational material is a surprisingly traditional warning. Jekyll assumes he can divide morality from desire and still control both sides. Science gives him the method, but arrogance creates the disaster. This is certainly not the adaptation anyone would use to introduce Stevenson's novel in a classroom. As exploitation cinema, however, it demonstrates what happened when early 1970s filmmakers took respectable literary science fiction and rebuilt it for an audience looking for material mainstream studios would avoid. This version simply decided not to hide very much. Number 9. Inseminoid, 1981. Nothing good ever seems to happen when a research team discovers something mysterious beneath the surface of another planet. Inseminoid takes that familiar warning and turns it into a claustrophobic survival nightmare. A group of scientists explores the remains of an ancient extraterrestrial civilization. Their isolated base sits among underground tunnels and archaeological chambers, suggesting that something significant once existed there. Then researcher Sandy encounters an alien force, and everything changes. At first, the others cannot determine whether she is injured, traumatized, or affected by something biological. Many sequences were filmed in real underground caves, creating dirty, narrow corridors where visibility is poor and escape routes always seem uncertain. The most famous stretches involve Sandy moving through the tunnels while former teammates attempt to understand what she has become. She is no longer behaving like the researcher they knew, yet traces of that person seem to remain, making every encounter more uncomfortable. The film also became controversial because of the biological themes surrounding Sandy's transformation, and censorship varied across markets. But underneath the sensational reputation is a straightforward science fiction fear. The danger does not remain outside the group. These researchers travel far from civilization, encounter something they do not understand, and discover that all their equipment is nearly useless once the phenomenon affects one of their own. Inseminoid had a limited budget, but the underground setting gave it something valuable: genuine isolation. The tunnels look hostile even before anything happens, so once the expedition begins falling apart, the audience feels trapped beside them. Number 8. Galaxy of Terror, 1981. What if an alien world did not simply send monsters after you? What if it discovered your deepest fear and gave that fear a physical form? That idea drives Galaxy of Terror, a low-budget production that often behaves like exploitation but contains a surprisingly strong science fiction concept. A rescue team travels to the mysterious planet Morganthus after another spacecraft disappears. The mission appears simple: locate survivors, determine what happened, and return home. Instead, the crew discovers a massive alien pyramid and enters it. Inside, normal reality seems to stop obeying familiar rules. The pyramid appears capable of understanding the visitors psychologically and transforming private terror into something physically dangerous. One creature encounter became the movie's most notorious scene and generated controversy that has followed it for decades. Without describing it graphically, the sequence combines creature effects and exploitation imagery in a way mainstream studio science fiction generally avoided. Behind the scenes, future blockbuster director James Cameron worked on the production, and his resourcefulness can be seen in the sets. The pyramid feels larger than the budget should allow. Moist surfaces smoke darkness, and industrial textures hide limitations while creating an oppressive atmosphere. What gets lost beneath the controversy is the clever premise. The characters are not simply being hunted by aliens, they are being forced to confront themselves. The pyramid turns fear into an enemy that cannot be defeated by ordinary weapons. That makes Galaxy of Terror a perfect cult film, part monster movie, part psychological nightmare, part exploitation spectacle, and somehow more imaginative than many expensive productions released around the same time. Number 7. The Curious Dr. Hump, 1969. Mad scientists had been frightening audiences for decades before this Argentine production appeared, but few had experiments quite like those conducted by Dr. Hump. The film begins with seemingly unrelated people being abducted and transported to a hidden laboratory. Behind the disappearances is Hump, a researcher obsessed with extracting a strange form of energy from human subjects. His underground workplace contains everything expected from a vintage horror laboratory: unusual machinery, medical equipment, blinking lights, mysterious chemicals, and a grotesque assistant wandering through the corridors. Yet director Emilio Vieira does not treat the material like a traditional monster movie. He pushes it into adults-only exploitation, making the experiments more provocative than anything classic Hollywood would have shown. A reporter and the authorities gradually investigate the disappearances. As they move closer to the truth, Hump explains that intense human emotion may create an energy capable of extending life. That bizarre idea gives the sensational story a recognizable science fiction foundation. The laboratory scenes are easily the most famous. Hump watches his subjects while machines record reactions, creating an uncomfortable mixture of medicine surveillance and obsession. The equipment may look primitive by modern standards, but the atmosphere is effective because the scientist clearly believes morality is an obstacle rather than a boundary. Science fiction has always warned about researchers who believe discovery matters more than consequences. The curious Dr. Hump simply takes that familiar warning and drags it into territory that older studio productions were never allowed to enter. Number 6. Life Force, 1985. Imagine astronauts discovering a gigantic alien spacecraft hidden inside Halley's Comet. Then imagine that discovery somehow turning London into a mixture of space opera gothic nightmare and apocalyptic disaster film. Astronauts aboard the shuttle Churchill investigate the enormous extraterrestrial vessel and discover 3 apparently human bodies preserved inside transparent containers. They bring the mysterious beings aboard, believing they have made the scientific discovery of a lifetime. When the bodies eventually reach Earth, researchers realize the visitors are not ordinary extraterrestrials. They survive by draining life energy from people, and those affected can spread the phenomenon to others. What begins as a laboratory mystery grows into a citywide disaster. Matilda May's unnamed alien woman became the movie's most famous image. Director Tobe Hooper presents her with an almost supernatural calm. She rarely needs to behave like a traditional monster because the people around her are already terrified by what she represents. By the final act, London is descending into chaos. Streets fill with panic while streams of energy appear to rise above the city toward the alien spacecraft overhead. The quiet mystery from the beginning has become an apocalypse. That constant genre switching is exactly why Life Force remains so entertaining. Finally, everything turns into a full disaster movie with elaborate visual effects. Its adult imagery attracted controversy, but the greater surprise is how ambitious the production looks. This was not a tiny underground movie trying to shock viewers cheaply. It was a large-scale science fiction spectacle, deliberately mixing prestigious effects with material most expensive studio films would have softened. That combination makes it one of the most gloriously excessive science fiction oddities of the 1980s. Number 5. Videodrome, 1983. What if the television screen was not simply showing you images? What if those images were slowly changing the person watching them? David Cronenberg built Videodrome around that disturbing idea decades before streaming platforms, smartphones, and algorithms made constant media consumption an ordinary part of life. James Woods plays Max Wren, the owner of a small television station, constantly searching for programming that will attract viewers. Then his technician discovers a mysterious broadcast called Videodrome. The signal appears to show disturbing events without traditional storytelling. Max becomes fascinated and wants to locate whoever is producing it. He believes the broadcast could become exactly the kind of controversial programming his station needs. Technology appears capable of interacting physically with the human body. He can no longer determine whether certain events are real hallucinations or deliberate manipulations. Those effects became some of Cronenberg's most recognizable images. It is about media power. Different groups want to use broadcasting to reshape behavior, culture, and political thinking. Max enters the story assuming he controls the images people consume. By the end, he looks more like something created by those images. That reversal has only become more relevant. Modern technology looks very different from the videotapes and analog screens shown in the film, but the central question remains uncomfortable. What happens when people constantly search for stronger stimulation, and media systems learn exactly how to hold their attention? Videodrome turns that fear into physical science fiction. The movie suggests technology does not need to become a giant robot or evil computer to transform humanity. It only needs to become something people cannot stop watching. Number 4. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. The most frightening technology in A Clockwork Orange is not a spaceship robot or futuristic weapon. It is a government program claiming it can scientifically manufacture a good person. Alex lives in a near-future Britain and spends his nights creating chaos with his group of followers. He is intelligent, loves Beethoven, and speaks with strange confidence, yet his behavior toward other people is cruel and reckless. Eventually, his own companions betray him, and Alex is arrested. Prison appears to end his freedom, but authorities soon offer him another possibility. He can volunteer for an experimental behavioral conditioning program called the Ludovico technique. The famous treatment sequence remains one of the most recognizable scenes in dystopian cinema. He is restrained in a chair, his eyes mechanically held open while disturbing images play in front of him. Medication creates severe sickness, training his body to associate violent thoughts with physical suffering. Even Beethoven becomes linked to the conditioning. When the treatment ends, government officials proudly demonstrate that Alex can no longer respond aggressively. But Stanley Kubrick forces the audience to ask whether anything moral has actually been achieved. He has simply lost the physical ability to choose certain actions. That distinction turns the film into a debate about free will. Its release history in Britain became especially famous after Kubrick withdrew it from circulation there for years. But reducing A Clockwork Orange to scandal misses what makes it so powerful. If a person can only behave well because technology makes disobedience physically impossible, is that person truly good? Kubrick offers no comfortable answer, which is why the film still feels dangerous long after its original shock value faded. Number 3. Night Dreams, 1981. Very few films took the phrase experimental science fiction as literally as night dreams. Released during the early 1980s, this adults-only production combines psychological experiments, dream technology, surreal fantasy, and science fiction imagery into something that feels less like a normal movie and more like somebody recorded a futuristic hallucination. The story centers on a woman taking part in an unusual laboratory study. Scientists connect her to equipment designed to examine fantasies and subconscious reactions while monitoring what happens inside her mind. Once the experiment begins, reality almost disappears. Instead of following one conventional plot, the movie moves through increasingly bizarre dream environments. Familiar locations suddenly transform, characters appear in strange costumes, and ordinary situations become surreal without warning. One of the most memorable sequences sends the central character through an exaggerated fantasy landscape where sets, lighting, music, and costumes deliberately resemble an experimental underground stage production. The scientists continue watching from their laboratory, turning the audience into another group of observers studying these impossible dreams. What makes Night Dreams particularly appropriate for this countdown is that the science fiction concept is not simply decoration. The entire movie depends on technology supposedly opening a doorway into the subconscious mind. It was also genuinely produced and distributed as adults-only cinema rather than merely gaining a controversial reputation afterward. Yet beneath its provocative surface is a surprisingly interesting question. If scientists develop technology capable of recording or entering someone's private dreams, would those dreams still belong to that person? Number 2. Titane, 2021. Titane practically challenges the audience from the beginning to accept that normal rules no longer apply. Alexia survives a serious car accident as a child and receives a titanium plate inside her skull. As an adult, she works around automobile shows and has developed an intense psychological connection to machines. That connection soon moves into territory that makes the movie extremely difficult to summarize without sounding unbelievable. After Alexia becomes involved in a series of dangerous events, she needs to disappear. She changes her appearance and assumes the identity of Adrian, a boy who vanished years earlier. Adrian's father, Vincent, is a firefighter who has spent years living with grief. When Alexia appears, Vincent desperately accepts the possibility that his missing child has returned. What initially feels like extreme body horror gradually becomes an unusual story about loneliness, identity, and two damaged people forming an unexpected family. The scenes involving Alexia's impossible connection with automobiles became the material viewers discussed most. Her body changes in ways normal biology cannot explain, and mechanical imagery appears where ordinary physical explanations should exist. Director Julia Ducournau refuses to provide a neat scientific answer. Is Alexia's transformation literal? Vincent also struggles desperately to maintain his own body and identity, creating a strange parallel between them. Both characters are trying to force their physical selves to match identities they cannot fully control. That is what makes Titane more than a collection of provocative scenes. It keeps changing what kind of movie the audience believes it is watching. It asks viewers to emotionally accept something biologically impossible and never gives them enough time to become comfortable with it. Number 1. Crimes of the Future, 2022. What happens if the human body evolves faster than society's definition of what a human body is supposed to be? David Cronenberg turns that question into an entire future world in Crimes of the Future. Viggo Mortensen plays Saul Tenser, a performance artist whose body has developed the ability to produce mysterious new organs. Instead of treating this condition only as a medical emergency, Saul makes it part of his art. His partner Caprice removes the organs during public performances using advanced surgical machinery. That simple fact reveals how much humanity has changed in Cronenberg's future. Government officials even maintain systems for registering unusual organs because they fear people may be evolving in ways institutions cannot control. A secretive group appears able to process synthetic materials as food. In other words, the human body may be adapting biologically to the pollution and plastics civilization created. That concept turns environmental destruction into evolutionary pressure. The performance sequences provide the movie's most unsettling imagery. Saul lies inside unusual mechanical equipment, while Caprice operates devices that look halfway between medical technology and living organisms. Cronenberg explored that relationship for decades, but here he builds an entire society around it. The strange imagery exists because the science fiction question itself is strange. If humans spend centuries reshaping the planet with chemicals, synthetic materials, and technology, could the altered environment eventually reshape humans in return? And if our bodies truly began evolving into something unfamiliar, who would have the authority to decide whether that evolution was natural, dangerous, or even human? Human beings may simply be becoming creatures that the technological world helped create. That uncertainty makes the ending especially powerful because the future shown here is not about humanity losing to an outside enemy, but about humanity slowly becoming almost completely unfamiliar to itself. From psychedelic space adventures and secret laboratories to alien mutations and futures where the human body itself becomes technology, these films proved science fiction has always had a dangerous side. Some were censored, some became cult classics, and some still make viewers wonder how they were ever released. Which movie went too far, and which one deserves another look? Comment below, like the video, share it, and subscribe for more forgotten cinema.